Welcome back, Kevork, to Unfiltered with Sam. It's a pleasure to host you again.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Kevork, I'd like us to touch upon the situation in Syria and especially about the very concerning reports coming out from certain minority groups in Syria. I would like us to touch upon the major minority groups. We'll take them one by one and address their situation. So, recent reports indicate that there's targeted violence against minority communities, especially the Christians and the Alawites in Syria. Could you please elaborate on the extent of these actions, being that mainstream media are not really reporting them in an accurate manner?
Yes, actually, there is a wide-scale ethnic and sectarian motivated violence in Syria at the current moment, and this has been anticipated before the fall of the Assad regime. Under the Assad regime, the country was governed by political authoritarianism, and the government imposed the pan Arabist ideology over the people in order to bring them all under one, let's say, identity, under one umbrella where everyone is a Syrian. But once the central government has collapsed and once the Syrian army has been destroyed, then the backbone of the state and also the Jacobian force which imposes national identity has gone and vanished. Therefore, every, let's say, group in Syria, every component of the Syrian society started seeing itself as part of their sub identity. Like the Christians are Christians, Sunnis are Sunnis, Alawites are Alawites, Druze are Druze, and the Kurds are Kurds. Before that, before the regime change, everybody was Syrian Armenian or Syrian, let's say, Catholic, but nobody used to ask what is your religion and what is your sect. But when you give power to, let's say, the founder of the Al Qaeda offshoot in Syria, Abu Muhammad al Jolani, was partnered with Abu Bakr al Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, the former leader of ISIS. It is naive to think that Abu Muhammad al Jolani has become Ahmad al Shara because they changed his name, or he is now wearing a suit and a tie. Then he has become a European, for example, because this is the image they're trying to send to the outside world. You can take a man out of Al Qaeda, but you cannot take Al Qaeda out of a man. Therefore, once he came to power, he wanted to centralize the powers in his hands in a sectarian manner. And this is the main reason why he sent his death squads basically to the coastal cities of Syria, namely Latakia, Tartus, Jable, and Banias, and confirmed there are thousands of dead people. The numbers that we are seeing nowadays, the official numbers, are probably 10% of the reality because there is a complete blackout, and the Jolani regime has banned all the press and all the humanitarian organizations to go there. But from the videos that we have seen, there were many mass executions of entire families in the streets, men, women, children, it doesn't matter, just because they were born as an Alawite. And in the discourse of this free spree of killing, they have also killed many Christians, but the vast majority of the killings happened against the Alawite minority in these cities.
Kevork, it's important for people to know, and if you can please clarify that to us. Are the majority of the Jolani forces truly Syrian? What percentage of them are Syrian?
Officially, they say 70% of the Jolani's army are Syrians and 30% are multinational. However, everybody knows in Syria, every serious observer of the Syrian conflict knows that the striking force and the most brutal force in Jolani's army are the Uyghurs from the Islamic Turkestan army, are the Uzbeks, are the Tajiks, are the Saudis, are the Egyptians, and from all around the world. And when we see these videos of the mass killings, it is quite obvious that regardless of the identity, regardless of the nationality of the person, they're all acting in the same manner. So if he's a Syrian or he's a Tajik or if he's a Uyghur, for example, they're all using the same terminologies, they're all using the same literature, and they're all using and weaponizing the same ideology, and that is Salafi Takfirism, and especially the teachings of Ibn Taymiyyah, who revolutionized the interpretations of Islam 800 years ago, but he was even controversial back then because of his very radical interpretations. However, ISIS, Al Qaeda, and all these elements, they use his teachings in their mass killings. For example, under the teachings of Ibn Taymiyyah, the priority should be for the Shiites and the Alawites, which means the persecution and the killing of the Alawites and the Shiites, according to this ideology, precedes the killing of the Christians and the Jews. This is how they say. Therefore, when you see these videos, it's not about revenge. It's not about killing people because of a political difference. Only because somebody was born in an Alawite sect or a Shia sect or a Christian, they are killing them in cold blood. And when you also further, let's say, focus on their word, what they are saying when they kill, and in the aftermath of these killings, it seems the reason for the killing is not only to kill but also to enjoy the killing.
Oh my
And
God.
this has been and this is the peak psychopathy, that someone completely loses his empathy and sympathy to another human being and can mass murder, let's say, an entire family and then dance over the dead bodies. I will just give you one example. In one of the very impoverished towns, which people live below the poverty line, they went to this village because it's an Alawite village, and they have killed at the entrance of the village 3 men. And two of them were in the 40s or 50s, and one of them was younger. And then we see an old woman, probably in her 70s. She's walking downstairs to the dead bodies, and she asks them, "What did you do to my sons?" And they stand on the bodies, basically step over the bodies, and they say, "We killed your pigs, so come and pick up your pigs." So imagine seeing a woman in her, she's 70 years old, that you killed her 3 sons, and then you celebrate and enjoy that killing in front of that woman. Meanwhile, there is an old woman grieving over the bodies of lifeless bodies of her sons. This is the peak inhumanity and psychopathy that is in the brains, and if there is any brain, let's say, in these militants of the Jolani army.
Kevork, I know it's a kind of offbeat question, but could they also be on drugs when they're performing these acts of violence? Because back in 1974, when the Turkish invasion happened in Cyprus, a lot of brutal acts were committed against the Greek Cypriot population. And reports came about later that the Turks were having some of the soldiers on drugs in order to commit such heinous, inhumane, heinous acts of violence.
Actually, this is not something new in the Syrian conflict. Since the beginning, there has been a big market of selling drugs to these militants. One of the drugs is called Keptagon. And
Excuse me?
Keptagon in the 70s, the drug called Keptagon,
Okay.
in the 70s, it was used for I think, for depression. It was for medical use, and then they banned it. And now they're using it as a drug. So I spoke to a friend in 2017. He was defending Palmyra against ISIS. And he told me that in one of the attacks against them, that these ISIS militants, when they come closer, and even though they receive shots in their chest, in their head, although they fall on the ground, they are still trying to move. Their body is still trying to run or move because of the strong rush of dopamine and serotonin in the body. Their body is still in the motion of walking, meanwhile they are dead.
Yes.
And this is the proof that they were taking drugs. And the most famous one, or notoriously known as this Keptagon. So I don't rule out the possibility at all that they were using a Keptagon. Now somebody come and says, but it is Ramadan, they don't do these things, etc., etc. I mean, during Ramadan, killing is also forbidden. I mean, killing overall of any prisoner of war, by the way, this is stated in the Quran, because I had to go and check even in the Quran that a prisoner of war cannot be killed. But they're not only killing prisoners of war because those are not combatants, those are hostages. They are mass murdering men, women, and children in the
Civilians.
streets. Yeah, civilians. Now I watched countless videos, and 99% of the videos I watched were mass executions of civilians. Those were not combatants. Therefore, if somebody kills during Ramadan, he will definitely take drugs. I would not rule out that possibility at all because this complete heartlessness that you see in this video and savagery that you see in the video, it's limitless. Like
Yes.
when I watch it the other day, I also wrote this on X. I said the the army of Osama bin Laden looks like a light version compared to what Jolani's army is committing in Syria. I haven't seen the Al Qaeda terrorists of Osama bin Laden mass executing people, like hundreds of them in one day, or decapitating everyone that comes encounters them. Like they have committed a lot of heinous crimes, but I haven't seen wide scale terrorism like this in my life. Probably the Yazidis have faced this a few years ago by ISIS, and before that, of course, the Armenians. Like this is a typical how the Armenian genocide happened. Basically, the Greeks have also witnessed similar atrocities,
Yes.
and the Alawites received similar atrocities, were subjected to similar atrocities. And when we were, as a third generation survivor of the Armenian genocide, when I asked my parents and grandparents how was it possible? How could they kill hundreds of thousands of people? Well, this is how. You can go from house to house and take out the families and wipe them out. So imagine during the time of social media, and it is televised and it's still happening. But
Exactly.
110 years ago, when there was no technology, imagine what happened back then.
Yes. I mean, the difference now with back then is that it's all out in the open. Of course, not on all platforms, but thankfully, until now, you can X, X people can still put these things up on X, not on other platforms.
Yes.
So one wonders why there isn't a bigger international outcry against these heinous crimes, and not just from the people of the world, but also from the governments of the world, especially the Western world. On the contrary, you see them trying to appease to Jolani and meeting up with him and trying to reach agreements with him. So all these double standards existing, them trying to say that the West is a beacon of democracy, but not applying it in this case and of human rights. But where are they professing for the human rights now of all the people being mass ethnically cleansed in Syria?
Yeah. Only 3 days after the massacres, the foreign minister of Germany visited Syria, and then they invited the foreign minister of Jolani to the EU meeting in Brussels, and they have voted to give him $5.6 billion of aid. So it's beyond hypocrisy, and especially that in the past years they have cut ties with the Assad government, saying that Assad has killed his own people, so we cannot deal with him. This was the argument. So if the reason was about killing, then Jolani is also killing. But these double standards means that the issue of human rights is weaponized against certain countries for political ends. And they don't care about human rights at all, especially now that Syria is ruled by Al Qaeda regime. And
Yes.
when I turn on my TV or when I read the mainstream press, also in Germany, there is no mention that Abu
Not.
Muhammad al-Jolani was the leader of Al-Qaeda. There is no mention that he was from ISIS. There is no mention that he fought in Iraq and he used to send car bombs. There is no mention at all. His only a few years ago, his speeches and his interviews basically saying that the Alawites should convert to Sunni Islam or they should be killed. And the same goes to the Christians, that they have to pay a jizya, a tax,
Yes.
or we convert. He was saying all these things in public, but now they say he changed. Even the Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, I think his name is Hukebe. No, not Hukebe. That's the
Witkoff.
ambassador to yeah, Witkoff. Witkoff says that Jolani is a changed man, that he's not the same guy. It is it is absurd, It's not like a phase. Someone like every one of us in the younger age passed through some phase. I understand, but not through the phase of terrorism. It's not like it's normal somebody to decapitate people and send car bombs and kill people and call it a phase. Only a few years ago, before he moved and became the self elected president of Syria, the current justice minister that he appointed, he was overseeing public executions in Idlib.
Oh,
Like they accuse a woman of adultery. There is no court, it's a banana court. And they say, we prove that you have committed an adultery. And then they shoot her in the head in the
oh,
street. And those are all documented on video. And
and
this is the Jolani regime that they brought.
now he's
He's
the
the justice minister
appointed
of Syria.
justice minister. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh God.
As this is, should terrify,
Kevork,
of course,
yes. Tell me.
this should terrify, especially Greece and Cyprus. I'm not trying to do fear mongering because this is now an expansion of the Ottoman Empire under Erdogan into Syria.
Yes.
And if these radical elements are emboldened, Erdogan can use these radical tens of thousands of Takfiri terrorists as a proxy army, as a contract army. If he can use it in Syria, if he used it in Karabakh against the Armenians, only in 2020 he sent these terrorists to Azerbaijan to fight against the Armenians. I don't know why people assume that Erdogan would not try to use this proxy army against other countries such as Greece, for
Yeah.
example.
I agree with you and I share your concerns, as do many of my compatriots here, as well as in Greece. But it's the governments that are in control, and we are just extremists if we express such views,
Yes.
which are justified just by the situation evolving next door. I wanted to also ask you about the other minority, the Kurds. So they reached the agreement with the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are the Kurdish group. They reached the agreement with Jolani's so-called government. And it's, for an outsider, having the SDF sign an agreement with the Turkish-backed Jolani, I mean, having the Kurds sign an agreement with Turkish-backed Jolani government is an oxymoron. Where have all their years for, self-righteousness and determination and autonomy gone? So how is this going to affect the Kurdish aspirations for autonomy of the Kurdish population, in your view, briefly?
Actually, I think this is an American brokered deal. It was the US which urged SDF to sign this deal because they need Jolani for a few things. Jolani is the perfect candidate for the US in the central government in Damascus, who is creating all these vertical divisions in the country. They need him to have a legitimacy by striking this deal with the SDF, because if he stays in power, all other minority groups in the country will start creating their own cantons, and this will lead into the Balkanization of Syria, which is the end goal of the US and Israel. Now, the Kurds could maneuver and make this deal with the Jolani regime in order to avoid attacks from the Jolani gangs, etc. But on the long run, even in the short run, I don't think that this agreement is sustainable, especially that Jolani has proposed the draft version of the constitution, which doesn't give the Kurds their, let's say, autonomous rights in the eastern shore of the Euphrates, and the SDF has condemned and criticized it. Therefore, for example, so many things that in the constitution keeps the authorities centralized in the hands of the Jolani, and nobody can remove Jolani from power, not even the parliament. There is no authority in the country that he's responsible in front of. And I don't think that the Kurds can get along with such a constitution. Sooner or later, Jolani will face the bitter truth, and that is especially the Kurds, the Druze, the Christians, and the Alawites and the Shiites are not going to accept his rule. So he will be in front of two options: either open a war against them or accept the fact that the country will be fragmented. And I think that the Americans are pushing Jolani into this direction. They were happy to see these massacres happened in the coastal cities because this will pave the way for the people to accept the fact that their country will be Balkanized. Because before the regime change, the people were resisting this US-led regime change war to keep their country united. But now, with these massacres, everybody say, whom I talk to, we cannot live with these savages any longer,
Yeah.
and these people are terrorists. Therefore, we want our own autonomous region, and this will definitely apply on the Alawites, the Christians, and the Druze, and the Kurds in this case.
So, since you mentioned the Druze, that's the other community I wanted us to briefly touch upon. They face challenges amid the current political landscape. They possibly are not facing the direct existential threat that Alawites are currently facing in Christians. Considering the role Israel also plays in influencing the situation of the Druze in Syria, what's the current situation with the Druze right now?
I think the Druze are immune from Jolani attacks. Like, there is an existential threat against them, but the US and Israel have already set the red line. And if the Jolani army comes anywhere close to the Druze areas, they will be bombed by the US and by Israel. And there is a big Druze community in the Syrian occupied Golan Heights, which is now occupied by Israel. And Israel is trying to open a corridor between the Golan Heights to the Asweda region where this Druze community lives. Therefore, in this case, I see that the biggest benefactor of this in the south of Syria is Israel. They have created a demilitarized zone around 60 kilometers all the way to Damascus. There is no Jolani army on the south of Damascus, which means Daraa, Qunaytira, and Sweda are now free of Jolani army and any equipment belonging to him. And they will try to occupy further land to open a channel, let's say land corridor with the Druze in Asweda. This is the strategy of Israel, and I think that the Druze have learned, at least from this recent experience of the Alawites, that laying down the arms and trusting the Jolani army would be a fatal mistake, because the Alawites trusted the Jolani army. Once he came to power, Jolani said, "You can lay down your arm and you guys are all safe and we will not touch you." But once they give up their arms, see what happens. So the other minorities are also watching what Jolani is doing, and I think this is creating lots of mistrust from the people and from the leadership of these people. Now, the Druze leadership, they are divided, let's say, in Sweda, but they're mostly in opposition to the Jolani's approach in the country. And this will only keep the country fragmented, and Jolani will not be able to establish a centralized government and with the complete control over Syria, because also there are other international considerations here, especially between Turkey and Israel. Now, Turkey tries to build a military base in the center of Syria in Palmyra because Erdogan wants to make Syria a colony of
Yes.
Turkey, and the Israelis do not want to see the expansion of the Turkish influence in Syria, and therefore they're bombing these military bases in central Syria. So this is creating lots of difficulties for Jolani. Once the domestic factors that I mentioned, the minorities will not accept him.
Yeah.
Many of them are armed, and now we have the regional countries and international powers are supporting the minorities, including direct intervention against the Jolani army if they move their forces against them or allow Turkey to expand further in the country.
That's a great point how you touched upon, because I wanted to ask you about Turkey and Israel. I mean, do you foresee the inevitability that Turkey and Israel at some point in the mid to long term future will come to a head on clash over the Syrian territories at some point in the future?
I think if the Turks stay in Aleppo, in Idlib, for example, in Hama, Israel will not mind the Turkish presence. There are two places that Israel objects: the coastal cities, Latakia, Tartus, Jableh, because they don't want for Turkey to have an exclusive rights to extract the gas from the Mediterranean, and this is also an interest shared by Cyprus and Greece.
Yeah.
And this is why the Greek and Cypriot officials were in Damascus, basically telling Jolani that he cannot give these licenses to Turkey, and this violates international law. So they have explained to him, but he's still adamant, let's say, to give Turkey these gas fields. And that's why here Russia and Israel are cooperating to keep these coastal cities under the patronage of Russia. because Israel cannot intervene directly in the coast. They can in the south, in Dar al-Sueda, as I mentioned, militarily. But in the coastal cities, I believe this is what Russia is going to do in cooperation with many powers, Israel, US, Cyprus, and Greece, to keep the Turkish influence out of the coastal cities. And in the central part of Syria, in Palmyra and the south, this is where it seems that Israel has set the line. And every time Jolani tries to give, let's say, license for Turkey to build a military site anywhere in central Syria, the Israelis are bombing it. So direct clash, I rule out that there would be a direct clash between both sides in Syria. However, there is definitely going to be a conflict with proxy. The Israelis can bomb the proxies of Erdogan, not directly hitting any military objects or subjects for the Turkish army, and try to limit the expansion of Turkey. For Turkey, this was the end goal. When the regime change happened, they thought this is the end goal, and they will establish now their pan-Turkic neo-Ottoman state. But for the Israelis, this was not the end goal. This was one of the stages before other stages, and that is to Balkanize the country. So it is in the interest of Israel to Balkanize the country, but for Turkey, although they object the Balkanization, but they would be satisfied if they take over Aleppo and Idlib and Hama and Homs, and the rest stays in chaos. I think this is the first stage in this is what we're going to see in the next stage of the Syrian conflict.
Yeah, but are you not of the opinion that Erdogan would really want access to the oil and gas of the coastal cities?
Yes, definitely. And he
Yeah,
already spoke with Jolani about this. He wants the oil and gas from the Mediterranean. And I think there is a consensus in the region not to give Turkey
yeah,
much leverage, especially that Turkey is building a big navy. And the reason for it is to protect its maritime borders, but the real reason for it is to project its military might
yeah.
on the Mediterranean in order to get these licenses for gas and oil fields.
Yeah, so let's see how that evolves. I mean, everyone might be warning Turkey not to go ahead with it, including the big powers like the US, Israel, and Russia. But we all know Erdogan is unpredictable, and he beats to his own rhythm. So he cannot be trusted.
But he could be removed soon, so let's see.
Yeah, let's see. That doesn't go to say that the ones who will come and replace him, the Republican Party,
yes,
are better. That's another analysis for another point, because a lot of people misjudge that by removing him and putting the Republicans in place, that it would be better. I wanted to ask you about Lebanon briefly. Why are Jolani's forces performing attacks on Lebanese soil? What is your rationale to this?
That's a very good question. Though Israel is attacking Syria in the south, and Turkey is occupying in the north, and the US is occupying in the east, there are 4 or 5 multinational armies and thousands of multinational takfiris in Syria, but he doesn't attack them. He's attacking Lebanon.
Exactly.
The reason for it is simple, because the instruction for Jolani is to cut the supply chains of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And this is the next stage that Israel and the US are trying to enforce in the region, and that is to completely siege Lebanon and cut the supply chains of Hezbollah so that Hezbollah wouldn't have any access to the Syrian markets or to Iranian markets or to the Iraqi markets. Therefore, they are trying to seal the borders between Syria and Lebanon in order to impose a siege on the Hezbollah, because if Hezbollah doesn't have a supply chain from Iran or from Syria, then it will not have a replacement for its ammunition, for the weaponry that they're using. Therefore, Hezbollah in this case could be localized and just take care of its community instead of staying as a regional player, non-state actor, of course, and engage in wide-scale acts of hostilities with Israel. So this is definitely helping Israel in this case.
It is.
And they're using the sectarian hatred of the Jolani army against the Shia people in Lebanon, and they say we're fighting against Hezbollah. But the truth of the matter is, Jolani's army didn't fight against Hezbollah on the borders. Those were not even close to Hezbollah. Those were local villages. Those were clans in on the borders. And in Lebanon, everybody is armed, by the way. And if you see their uniform and the weapons they were using, many of them were American weapons by these clans in Lebanon. Hezbollah doesn't use any American weaponry. They're all Russian-made or Iranian-made weapons. Hezbollah didn't intervene in this and said they're not interested in this and they're not going to participate in it. There is a Lebanese army. They can protect the borders, and their duty was only for the southern part of Lebanon against Israel. But if Jolani army invades Lebanon or starts committing massacres inside Lebanon, then I think this will compel Hezbollah to intervene. But that's the trick they're trying to do, and that's how they're trying to force Hezbollah to go into war against these Al Qaeda forces, and then they would call it a sectarian war so that they could encourage the Sunnis in Lebanon to rise against Hezbollah. So they want a war between these parties that can devastate and exhaust Hezbollah without the intervention of Israel. Why would Israel intervene if you have a 40,000 Jolani army who are have the lust and all this thirst for blood of the Shias? They want to kill the Shias. This is what they say. So they could use the Jolani army in this case as a proxy against Hezbollah.
Yes. So just for the benefit of our viewers, in case it doesn't make sense, in this case, Jolani is indirectly benefiting Israel by doing these attacks in Lebanon. But if they're wondering why would Jolani want to cut off the supplies to Hezbollah, Hezbollah, one of Hezbollah's main backers was the Assad regime. So that's one of the reasons why Jolani supposedly is doing this, so that Hezbollah doesn't go and rearm the Alawites and Assad supporters, and then he has a problem internally.
Yes. And also Hezbollah participated in the war against these Al-Qaeda terrorists in Syria. There's
Yes.
so many Christian villages
All
and
these
towns
years,
were
yes, you are
liberated
right.
by Hezbollah.
By Hezbollah, you're right, you're right. My last question to you for now is, we need to briefly touch upon the Palestinians. What is to become of them? And I'm asking the question from an angle of, could you please explain to the viewers, how does the Palestinian plight connect with Syria and Jolani? Because I think you have a very good analysis on this, about Trump and him wanting to, well, ethnically cleanse, mass deport the Palestinians, and there's this big issue and who's going to take them. So how does the Palestinian issue connect with Syria and Jolani, in your view?
I think the Palestinian cause has become, since the 40s till today, this is the first time probably I would say the establishment of a Palestinian state has become very, very far away. And this is all connected to the events in Syria and Lebanon and the entire region. So the Palestinians definitely need backing, and they need, if they want to continue the armed struggle, they will need weapons, and they will need intelligence, they will need all the tangible support. And this used to come from Hezbollah, from Iran, from Syria. But now the entire Gaza Strip is decimated. Lebanon's Hezbollah's leadership has been decapitated, and they have decoupled the front lines between Lebanon and Gaza, and they're not fighting Israel any longer. And now they're coming after Yemen, they're coming after Iran. So they're coming after every player in the region who supported the Palestinians. And in this case, it seems that with the continuation of the hostilities against Gaza, the ceasefire agreement was a trap for the Palestinians. They have given them a very short window of, let's say, peace, between brackets. And then with the continuation, now the Palestinians say, we don't want another month or 2 or 3 of the same. Like 14 months was enough. And now we got our ceasefire, and we don't want this fight. Like nobody, no human being can endure what the Palestinians have endured in the Gaza Strip. Therefore, you see nowadays, whether provoked or not, whether it is encouraged from outside or not, we see protests now against Hamas inside the Gaza Strip. And the people say, we don't want this war any longer. Stop. So the Palestinians are getting closer to the two options. One, to expel Hamas from Gaza, or they would be expelled forcefully by the Trump and the Israeli governments. And one of the regimes in the region which could accept it is Syria. Jolani is Syria, because Jolani is the only leader now in the region who is vulnerable enough to accept to receive Palestinians in exchange for endorsement from the Trump administration. And this is why I think Witkoff said Jolani is probably a changed man, because they're talking to Jolani's regime about sending hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, but not on the borders with Israel, Palestine, but rather to the north, to Raqqa, or to Deir ez-Zor in the east, far away from the borders with the Golan Heights.
Which is a better
So
solution
Jolani,
for Israel than having them
of course,
deported to Egypt or Jordan, where they share
definitely.
long and direct borders.
Yes, I don't rule out that Jolani would accept it in exchange for long-term endorsement and
Very interesting.
legitimacy from the US. This
Very
has been
interesting.
reported in the Israeli press. They are talking about Sudan, Eritrea, and Syria.
Oh,
And I think Jolani would be portrayed as a hero among the Arabic and Islamic world, in the Arabic and Islamic world, by trying, in the media, they manufacture a narrative and they say Jolani has saved the Palestinians from an imminent genocide. So he is the hero of the Arab world. And they would give him lots of media and PR push,
oh,
but he's definitely collaborating with the US in this case, and he would not mind if the US and Israel say that they have dedicated $8 billion to build tent cities for the Palestinians in Sinai. They could do the same thing in Syria. They could build them tent cities in Deir ez-Zor. It's also desert. It's like in the Sinai. So it doesn't it's not a really big difference for them as long as they kick the Palestinians out. I would be very honest with you, because I don't want to say wishful things. I wholeheartedly want for the Palestinians to stay in their homes
yeah.
and to have their own state. But do I believe that is going to happen? Under such circumstances, the Palestinians are in a very, very, very weak situation. And we can only blame of course, the Arabic countries, and can blame Turkey for those who plotted to restart the regime change in December 2024, when entire Arab world or Islamic world were united
Yeah.
in their acts against against Israel to stop the ongoing slaughterhouse in Gaza. But then they started this regime change, restarted the regime change again in Syria. All the focus has shifted from Palestine to Syria, and the supply chains of Hezbollah have gone. So Palestinians have been now isolated. Hezbollah is also isolated by the Jolani army. So definitely Jolani helped Israel and the US with this takeover of Syria.
Kevork Almassian, thank you once again for your time and for your valuable and insightful analysis. I hope we'll be able to touch base again soon. My warm regards to you.
Thank you very much.